In August, the government of Zimbabwe received $961 million special drawing rights from the International Monetary Fund. The SDRs were allocated to all IMF member states to assist countries to recover from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Mthuli Ncube, stated that the funds will be spent in a transparent and accountable manner, and this is critical. Citizens have the constitutional right to know how much is being spent and on what. Today we have with us Honorable Dr. Mathew Nyashanu, Member of Parliament for Buhera Central. He is a holder of a PhD in Development Studies from the University of Da Vinci and a holder of a Master's in Business Administration from the University of South Africa. Honorable Dr. Nyashanu also has a degree in banking that he attained from the Institute of Bankers in South Africa. As such, he is an ex-banker who served Barclays and FBC banks at management level. We have him here today in his capacity as the chairperson of the Committee on Budget, Finance and Economic Development to answer on issues to do with strengthening oversight mechanisms to ensure optimum utilization of SDRs in Zimbabwe. My name is Tendai Manombo, and this is Real Talk. Thank you so much for joining us, Honorable. Welcome to our show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we're just going to go through a few questions around your committee, starting with the fact that, please may you explain what exactly IMF SDRs are?
Okay, the IMF SDRs are, is an artificial currency, I should say, an artificial currency held with IMF. It is then used by members. It's converted to their preferred currency.
Okay, and in our case in Zimbabwe, it was converted to US dollars.
They convert as at the time when they require to use it. But the SDRs can actually be kept as they are until such a time when the ministry decides to use it for something. Then they can convert it to a preferred currency. We have a basket of currencies, like the US dollar, the yen and the yuan, and the pound. Those are some of the currencies you can convert the SDR to.
Can you please explain the significance of the 961 million SDR allocation in our context as Zimbabwe, where there are a lot of social vulnerabilities?
960 million has a lot, can create a bigger impact to this economy, small as it is. Especially if you look at the vulnerability of our economy from exogenous shocks, such as these successive droughts we have had in this country, the COVID-19 pandemic, the cyclone Idai that we have experienced. Such, catastrophes can only be countered, managed by way of such inflows, such windfalls. To us, I think it's a blessing receiving that money, because then we are able to address social issues, like the education, health, particularly when you want to look at the management of COVID-19 itself, and also the vaccination program. So we have had a very successful vaccination program, because part of the SDR has been deployed to COVID-19 vaccination program.
All right. I just want to go back to the cyclone victims. Have they benefited from the SDR?
They don't benefit directly, but they benefit because, look, part of the minister's plan, if you look on the 29th of November 2021, the minister unveiled his plan for SDR utilization. And part of his plan was also to look at in the infrastructure cluster. If you go back to the Chimani issue, it's all about infrastructure. That we need to rebuild schools, we need to rebuild roads, reconstruct roads, bridges. And part of this money has actually been assigned to projects of that nature. So we would say those who were affected by Cyclone Idai have benefited indirectly through the deployment of resources to infrastructure development.
Okay, that's all right. But this is years after the fact. I mean, I know the SDRs were only released recently, last year, but then just talking about the victims, this is years after the fact, and we wait for relief from the IMF. Is that all right?
Not really. Government has not been waiting for SDR to reconstruct, roads and clinics, schools in the affected areas. Government had already begun the job, but I'm saying this will complement, this will supplement what we had already. To talk about the SDR, to go basically where the minister targeted. The minister targeted the SDR in infrastructure. When you look at the Harare Bridge Road, the minister has put quite some money in the construction of that road. There's also intention to come up with what we call the Mbunzi interchange. If you drive from Harare to Bright Bridge, when you get to Mbunzi, you realize that you are at a spot where you cannot pass through easily. You
cannot navigate at all.
It
chokes up.
Yes. So there's an intention through the Ministry of Transport to construct an interchange there. Okay. And part of the SDR is going to be assisting us as a nation to ensure that that goal is realized.
Okay, we'll come back to that. Are there any special conditions put in place by the IMF on what and how SDRs can be spent on?
SDRs are normally used during times of crisis. If you look at the SDR, which was released in the 1970, 1972, the SDR, which was released in the 1979, 1989, and the 2009 General SDR and the Special SDR of 2009, all these SDRs were meant to address crisis. In 2009 in particular, it was all to do with the financial crisis of 2009, the world financial crisis. So IMF releases the SDR particularly to address a crisis of that time. Like the 2021 SDR was meant to address the crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, countries will then choose to say which areas should we focus on. But particular attention is being given to the crisis, and priority is then given to the crisis. Like in our case, we are saying the SDR has been focusing on addressing the COVID-19 management in terms of the vaccination program and the management of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so do you know the guidelines that they use to determine what a crisis is and what it isn't?
No, I mean, look...
just if you're familiar with the guidelines.
No, I think when a crisis is on this planet, it's for everyone to see. And I'm sure the IMF, they also realized that there was need to address the world crisis of COVID-19 because it was a world crisis.
So they address the guidelines so far have been on a global scale.
It's on a global scale, and you're looking at member countries. Only member countries are eligible to SDR. Yeah. So if one country is not a member to IMF, they may not be entitled to the SDR quota, isn't it? So in our case as Zimbabwe, we are a member. Yeah. The Articles of Agreement of IMF allows IMF to release an SDR as and when they determine that there's need.
Okay.
To do that.
Just for the sake of our viewers, please may you explain how a state can be a member?
The membership of a state, I'm sure it's voluntary. I don't think there are particular conditions attached to that. Zimbabwe has been a member. I don't know for how long, but I think membership is voluntary.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all right. Honorable Nyashanu, as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Budget, Finance and Economic Development, what role, if any, did your committee play in Zimbabwe's SDR expenditure plan? Our
role as Parliament.
Specifically your committee?
Yes, the committee represents Parliament. In terms of the standing orders, standing order number 20, and the Constitution as well, Section 299 of the Constitution, mandates us as Parliament to have oversight on state revenues and expenditures of government That's where we come in as Parliament to ensure that whatever the executive is doing is in line with the Constitution. You are aware that we have both parliamentary democracy and constitutional democracy in our country. As Parliament, we are charged with the responsibility of ensuring that we protect the Constitution. The Constitution says in Section 299, it says in Section 299 that the Parliament has a role to play in ensuring that state revenues and expenditures are monitored. Upon the receipt of the SDR, we requested that the minister produce an SDR utilization plan. Which utilization plan I've been talking about. And we also expected him to outline what areas is he going to focus on the SDR. What is the next step? The next step would be then to follow up the minister to say, you said you are going to be investing at Mbudzi Interchange, Harare Bite Bridge Road, smallholder agriculture for vulnerable groups, health and education. You are going to be building, health facilities in extreme poverty areas. You are going to be building, educational facilities and clinics in extreme poverty areas. What have you done? So that's at the implementation stage. But our Standing Order 16 of Parliament as well, mandates Parliament also to then take an audit on what has been used. That's where public accounts comes in, to then check.
And they did do a report. It was quite a...
Yes, to then check if the money has been expended prudently in terms of the plan that has been tabled in Parliament.
So you're saying your role has been to make recommendations to the ministry and to hold them accountable?
We ask the minister to produce a utilization plan. Yes. This is a windfall. This is 960 million. So we ask the minister to produce a utilization plan. Which utilization plan he has done? Yes. And as I'm saying, his focus has been on education, on the social sectors, education, health, and the vulnerable groups. His focus was also on social safety nets. When we talk about social safety nets, we are saying the vulnerable groups, how can they be protected? Yeah, by coming up with sustainable livelihood projects, where we are now saying the Ministry of Agriculture is poised to ensure that at every village there is a bowl, and at every bowl there is a nutrition garden. That's part of the function of the SDR, to ensure that we reach out to the vulnerable groups, particularly in rural communities.
So is it your committee's responsibility to hold the minister accountable?
It is our committee's responsibility to follow up the minister in line with his plan. You hear what I'm saying? Because what should start is a plan, an outline of what we need to do in this month, which we have received. The next step is to follow up on those things. That's what I'm explaining. To say, if you said you are going to be investing in smallholder agriculture, 80 million in smallholder agriculture, where exactly has the 80 million been deployed? Audit then comes in place to then check the accounts, to see if the accounts are tallying. That's the post-audit job of the Public Accounts Committee. Again, that's happening in Parliament. But as budget and finance, our job is to ensure the implementation of the budget. How is the budget there? How is the I can call this 960 budget. So how is this 960 million being implemented? How is this man being expended? Like for instance, last year, the drawdown was 311 million, and they are meant to draw down 145 million this year. So not much has been seen on the ground. Yeah, because we are still at early stages. But we'll get to a stage where we now need to go and see what exactly has the man produced.
Right. Are you happy with the progress, though, so far?
I can't say I'm happy with the progress so far because it's still an issue of talking. Yeah, we want to get to a situation where we say Mbudzi Interchange is now there. Okay? So we visit to see what exactly is on the ground. Yeah? We want to get to a situation where we say about 80 million or 100 million of the SDR has been used on Harare Bite Bridge Road. How many kilometers have been done? So we tour that road and see how many kilometers have been. Just see those things physically. That's the role of the budget committee. Yes. But public accounts committee comes in to check audits. What has been audited by external audit.
That's great.
Yes.
I just want to ask, you said you're still at the talking stage, right?
At this
point, you're just talking about it and putting things in place.
Yes.
When can we expect some motion, some movement?
Well, I mean, look, these are projects that are being undertaken. I'll give an example of drilling rigs. Yeah, part of the SDR would also be meant to procure drilling rigs. For us to be able to achieve a bore at every village throughout this country, it means we need a lot of drilling rigs. Do you understand where I'm coming from? So those drilling rigs are still being procured, right?
Do you at least have a timeline, a time frame?
Well, I mean, that's more of the executive area. That's their area for, So we then come in to check how far they have gone. Yeah, we don't give them specific times to say by June you should have done this day, because they have their plans as the executive. Yes.
Thank you for that. We'll just take a very short break for now, and we'll be back after a moment.
Okay.
Welcome back to our next segment, where we're just having a very brief chat with Honorable Dr. Nyashanu. And Honorable, you are aware that there has been quite a lot of corruption going on in Zimbabwe, right? And public resources have been abused under the guard of Parliament. We talk, for example, the resources that were meant to assist in the fight of COVID-19, as reported by the Auditor General that you were talking about in our first segment. Okay, how is Parliament ensuring that the SDR funds are spent in a transparent and accountable manner?
Parliament is doing everything in its power to ensure that resources received in government are received to the consolidated account.
Are you able to break down what you mean by you're doing everything in your power?
In terms of Section 302 and Section 303 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, all funds received into the consolidated revenue account can only be released by authority of Parliament. What we're trying to do as Parliament, through various committees, is to ensure that the executive answer to expenditures and receipts in government. Because of the doctrine of separation of powers, Parliament can only make recommendations. Parliament cannot arrest. Parliament has no arresting powers. I agree with you, yes, there is corruption. Corruption is prevalent in our society. But I believe as a person that corruption can only be handled when we work together in our collective form to ensure that within our society we weed out corruption.
Okay, I just want to go back to your first statement where you said funds are released with the permission of the Parliament. How then do we end up with the cases that were highlighted by the Auditor General? Does it mean that Parliament actually released those funds that were misappropriated?
What it means, what I meant by my statement is to say we authorize the budget. We authorize, by authorizing the budget, we are authorizing the executive to make use of specific figures in their day-to-day running of the affairs of government. Any excess would then require that the executive will need to come back to Parliament for condonation. So, under normal circumstances, all expenditures of government should be coming through Parliament, for Parliament to authorize certain figures for them to make use of. I also want to share with you that Parliament is not involved in transactions per se, but Parliament is involved in releasing a blanket figure which the executive will then make use of throughout the course of running affairs of government in a particular period. What is Parliament doing to ensure that there is no corruption? All we can do is to be able to track the budget and see where exactly the funds are being used. Are the funds being deployed to rightful places? What is Parliament doing to ensure that funds released by way of a budget have been used for intended purposes? That's where our Public Accounts Committee comes in place. But remember, Public Accounts is a post-audit committee, which then looks at, issues that have already happened. It would be it an SDR fund, be it a budget, an annual budget, a national budget. It would have been used.
So what can be done to stop that chain of activities, to stop the corruption? Because you said basically what you're saying is, as Parliament, your job is to just release the funds. How they're used is out of your hands, right? What can be done? And then after that, public accounts.
I'm not saying how they are used is out of our hand. I'm saying we are not involved in a transaction. Because remember, corruption is complex. Yeah. I'm saying we want to procure drilling rigs. We are dealing with TBJ. Okay. And probably is the PEMSEC of a ministry who is releasing funds to pay drilling rigs here. That agreement that agreement does not happen between Parliament and you, or between Parliament and the ministry.
I get that, but my question is, what can be done? Because there's a gap here. Parliament is involved in the releasing of the funds, and then is not involved in the utilization of the funds. And then after the fact, Parliament reports on, oh no, those funds that we released were not used properly. What can be done to bridge this gap?
Yeah, a lot still needs to be done.
True, because this is a loophole.
A lot has to be done. One is what we need to do is to make sure that we strengthen oversight institutions. Oversight institutions like ZAC, for example, they need to be strengthened so that they have a way of tracking these issues.
Is there a way that they can come in and work with you? Because I know that they work with the public accounts, but is there a way that they can work with you as well?
No, at our stage, it may not be necessary for them to be with us. But I think at the audit stage, because that's when, a rot starts surfacing to say there's been misuse of funds there.
But at that point, it's already after the fact. What can be done while the action is taking place to stop corruption before it goes crazy?
Yeah, I think we need to go to the drawing board to say what is it that we can do. So but in terms of our constitution, there's no provision to say, Parliament can also be involved in the day-to-day running of ministries. Because that's the duty of the executive. But as of now, Parliament is only mandated to deal with the budget, right? Where Parliament authorizes the budget. And then the ministries can access that money for use.
All right. But for now, what mechanisms have you put in place to ensure transparency and accountability?
The only mechanism we have is to ensure that we bring ministers on Wednesday to Parliament for question and answer. We bring ministers for oral evidence to committees, various committees of Parliament, to answer questions on specific projects. And by so doing, members of Parliament will be detecting, where there are deficiencies. We also pay particular visits to infrastructure projects, big projects, where we also, by way of an eye, can tell that 2 billion could not be used on this project. Yeah, and we can be suspicious. That's when we can actually recommend for special audits in certain cases. But those are very rare cases where we then order for special audits. Areas where we are suspicious to say there is some glaring signs that funds have been abused.
So you remember earlier on you mentioned that, which we all are aware of, that Professor Mtuli said that the SDR was going to be used for vulnerable groups, health and education. All right, but poverty is rising and inequality is deepening in Zimbabwe, which I'm sure you can agree with me. Is genuine expenditure being done towards these sectors?
Yeah, the SDR was received in August last year. Let's take note of that.
Yes, there's been
the utilization plan came out in November last year. This is a period of implementation, right? And I wish if citizens could be, a little patient, because the reaction is not as fast as we think. This is money that has to be deployed in different areas for citizens to then start to feel the change. Now, I was talking about a program where government wants to invest a ball in every village and a nutrition village at the site of the ball. These are some of the transformation measures. And I think it's transformative in the sense that once we are able to achieve food sufficiency in villages, we are able to cut even on food import in this country. And, the vulnerability of our communities is also curtailed.
Yes, I get what you're saying, that it would be nice for citizens to just be a little bit patient, to just bear with you just for a moment. But we had the education division here. We had our TUS, it's a teachers union. They were here and they said they have not received anything, and they had children to teach in the rural areas during COVID, during the pandemic. I mean, we're not completely out of it, but it definitely has eased up. What could have been done to help them, because they received absolutely no help?
You need to come again. Teachers in terms of salaries?
No. Not salaries. Yeah. The education division. Sector. Yes.
So who reported that they received no help? Is it the teacher or the ministry?
The teachers.
Yeah. So they may not be privy to the kind of assistance the ministry is receiving from Ministry of Finance.
Which is?
Which is obviously the plan to establish, schools in extremely poverty areas. The SDR is meant to establish schools in extremely poverty areas.
So this is a long-term kind of plan. It's not something that's going to happen or bring relief.
One idea that the SDR has is also long-term. I agree with you in the sense that the thinking is to say poverty arises out of, education also causes, lack of education also causes poverty on our part. So in areas where, people have been lagging behind in terms of getting quality education, why don't we invest in establishing schools in areas where people have not been able to access good education? Yes, as a way of also addressing poverty, you see. Yeah.
But that is long-term, Honorable.
It is. Yeah, I agree.
What is happening right now?
It is, of course. It is, I agree. But these are long-term measures.
Yes, they're long-term measures, but then what are you doing to address the short-term issues, the day-to-day issues?
This is not money that the country receives every year. It is a windfall in the sense that it can come after 10 years or 20 years. And investing in long-term projects, in my view, I think is prudent. Yes, and also ensuring that we have reserve and contingent funds to ensure that we look after our currency as well is important.
That's important, but my question still is, this is a long-term plan, which is very prudent. Like you said, it's a noble idea, very noble approach. But in the short term, day-to-day lives, what are you doing to address those issues? Because, I mean, there is money on the budget for that, in the budget.
Already the national budget is catering for the day-to-day life of teachers in schools. Yeah. It may not be enough, as you have said, it may not be enough, but the national budget already is addressing. Yeah, remember even on our national budget, education got quite quite a significant amount. Yeah, primary education got quite some significant, primary and secondary education got some significant amount of money. And I think the focus of the SDR utilization itself, in my view, although questions can still be raised because people cannot be short of questions, is quite prudent in the sense that even if you look at the kind of infrastructure that is intended, that the SDR intends to establish in various provinces of this country in terms of health facilities. We lack health facilities in this country.
We do.
We lack educational facilities in this country.
And priority treatment, or at least fair treatment for the vulnerable people, disabled people.
Yes. The vulnerable groups are also being addressed through the SDR.
But for the long term.
Yeah, that's what we have to do. We have to build the necessary infrastructures for the current disabled and the future, you see.
But I guess my whole thing is people have been waiting. The situation has been worsening, and they're being asked by Parliament to please just wait a little bit longer.
You see, this amount of money will have impact in this country, but it will not solve all our problems.
Understandably. Yes. But the issue is, when will it solve some of these problems?
Yeah, what I'm saying is the money will solve some of our problems. It will have an impact to our economy, but it will not solve all our problems. Much of our problem. What is important is that once we create the necessary infrastructures, then we are able then to create the capacity for the country to be productive, our people to be productive wherever they are, by trying to create small irrigation facilities across the country. We are actually asking our people to work harder wherever they are, so that they produce for themselves. They are able to achieve self-sustenance. And I think that's what is key for this economy. For everyone, wherever they are, to be able to produce and feed themselves. And that SDR is now coming in as an enzyme to create the capacity for people to be able to feed themselves. When we have a bowl in every village, it means villagers will have a nutrition area where they can aid their...
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We'll just take another break and we'll continue our discussion then.
Okay.
Welcome to our third and final segment, and we're here with Honorable Dr. Nyashanu. And Honorable, we just want to continue with the conversation that we cut off when we were going for the break. What is your committee doing to ensure that there's transparency of information regarding utilization of the SDR?
The committee will ensure, and it has started the process, that periodically we meet with the minister to discuss the utilization. I think 2 weeks ago we met the minister. We had a lengthy discussion on the utilization of the SDR. But what we will continue to do is to request periodic reports from the ministry, so that as a committee we are able also to trace what is happening with the SDR utilization. Okay,
what is the purpose of these discussions that you have with the minister?
It was just to assure each other on whether the utilization plan which she gave us would be implemented as per the plan.
So you want to have these assurance discussions periodically?
Not necessarily assurance discussions, but this discussion we have had. Okay. Going forward, we shall be requesting for periodic reports. Okay. Yes, and also visits to infrastructure projects to verify.
That's important. So like a mini audit, a physical audit.
Yes, just to verify. If you say, yeah, you put money to Kunji Dam, we also have to have a look at the dam to see if it's worth the amount of money that is being talked about. So those are some of the checks that we'll be doing as Parliament. We will also be requesting also the Minister to bring in evidence, to Parliament through oral evidence, which we normally have. But also our members of the committee, during question time in plenary, Wednesday's question time, they will also be asking questions pertaining to the SDR. And other members of various other committees will also be posing questions in Parliament to check if the SDR utilization is in line with the plan.
All right. Should the citizens of Zimbabwe expect a report from your committee?
Yes, they will have a report from our committee, because we'll have our mid-year report just before the midterm review of the budget. We will produce our committee report in Parliament, and part of that report will be detailing the progress so far with the SDR utilization.
Okay, all right, and it will be available for everyone, everywhere, not just in the hands.
Once presented in Parliament, it becomes a public document. Yes.
We're doing this series on accountability and transparency.
Yes.
From committees in Parliament, from Parliament. And we started this thing. It's quite an exciting little game that we're playing. So you ask a question to our next guest. You don't know who the guest is, but it's around the issue of transparency and accountability. What would you like to ask our next guest? And we'll ask them that question. So you have had the experience, and you know the issues that you face as parliamentarians around transparency, around accountability, your experiences with the executive.
Yeah.
Just what question would you ask our next guest? It's a blind game.
Yeah. What can be done to strengthen our oversight institutions? Yeah.
That's a very good question. I think it's going to be hard on our guest.
What can be done to strengthen our oversight institutions? Parliament, number one. ZAC, Gender Commission. Yeah. All oversight institutions, what can be done to strengthen them? In view of our budgetary constraints. I think we can expand that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us.
I hope I added value to your program.
You definitely did, because many people have had questions around this, especially the teachers. And one of the biggest questions was, so of the three sectors, who gets priority: health, education, or vulnerable groups?
The three sectors will all get priority. They are number one.
But it's like fires erupting from everywhere.
We have had a very long period of recession in this country, my sister. When people talk, they talk as if we have never had droughts. We have never had sanctions. We have never had Cyclone Idai. We have never had COVID-19. They just want things to happen yesterday. Well, I think that's human mind. But the honest truth is, we are coming from periods of crisis, which we trying to address slowly. And it's not something that will happen overnight. But I think my statement to you would be to say, I think citizens must take responsibility. People must take responsibility at individual level. And even at private enterprise, people must also take responsibility that they have a role to play in the economy. The mentality of receivership, I think, must wade off our minds slowly so that we become responsible citizens. I think that's my statement.
Those are very wise words, and what a beautiful closing remark you've given. And please join us once again next week. Remember to like and subscribe so you can get notifications on our next videos, and also for Info, your weekly news in 4 minutes. Thank you once again, and thank you to our viewers. Please join us again next week.